Have you ever felt like you were giving everything in a relationship only to feel like you're chasing someone who keeps slipping further away? It feels like you're drowning in your own love, while the other person builds walls higher and higher. That's not just a mismatch, it's a hidden psychological war that so many people are silently fighting: the super empath vs. the avoidant. Or on one side, you have the super empath, the person who feels everything deeply, who loves fully, who thinks they can fix the cracks in the relationship with more effort, more patience, more sacrifice. On the other side, the avoidant, someone who retreats when things get too close, who mistakes intimacy for suffocation and distance for safety. When these two collide, it creates a cycle. The empath moves closer, the avoidant pulls away. The empath doubles down, the avoidant shuts down. Neither feels understood. Both feel trapped, and yet they're magnetically drawn to each other. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Because when you see this pattern clearly, you stop seeing it as love and start seeing it as survival. And from there, you get to choose: do you want to spend your life proving your worth to someone who runs from it? Or do you want to build a relationship where love feels safe, mutual, and free? The super empath is often described as the person who feels more, sees more, and gives more than most people in a relationship. They are the ones who can walk into a room and immediately sense the emotional temperature. They can tell if someone is upset even when that person insists everything is fine. Their emotional radar is finely tuned, and that sensitivity can be a gift. But when it comes to relationships with avoidant partners, that very gift becomes the trap. The super empath doesn't just notice someone pulling away, they feel it like a physical ache. And instead of creating distance themselves, their instinct is to bridge the gap, to lean in even more, to love harder. It comes from a deeply ingrained belief that if they can just show enough patience, compassion, and unconditional love, they will somehow unlock the other person's heart. They believe that closeness is the medicine, and so when the avoidant withdraws, the empath doubles down. They'll ask more questions, send more messages, and bend their boundaries to prove they're safe, to prove they won't abandon, to prove that love will conquer the fear the avoidant carries. The tragedy is this effort rarely makes the avoidant feel safer. It often makes them feel more suffocated. What the empath sees as care, the avoidant experiences as pressure, and the harder the empath tries, the more the avoidant shuts down. This isn't because the empath is weak or needy. In fact, super empaths are usually incredibly strong. Their desire to heal comes from resilience, from surviving their own struggles and believing that love can overcome pain. They often carry wounds from childhood where they learned that love must be earned, that attention and affection are conditional. As adults, this conditioning turns into an unconscious mission. If I just love enough, if I just stay long enough, I will finally be chosen. When that belief collides with an avoidant partner, it feels like a test the empath is determined not to fail. The trap tightens because super empaths often measure their worth by their ability to give and to heal. So if their partner is distant, cold, or unresponsive, they don't walk away. Instead, they take it as a signal to give more. They rationalize the avoidance behavior. They've been hurt before. They just need time. They'll come around if I stay patient. What they don't see is that this pattern erodes their own sense of self. The more they give, the more invisible they become. They silence their own needs for fear of driving the avoidant further away. And every time they ignore their needs, they teach themselves that their value lies only in how much they can tolerate and how much they can offer. The heartbreaking part is that the empath's gift, the ability to love deeply, is never the problem. The problem is where that love is directed and the belief that they have to overextend themselves to be worthy of love in return. By overinvesting in someone who resists closeness, the empath ends up draining themselves. What was meant to be connection becomes a cycle of pursuit and rejection. And instead of feeling cherished, the empath feels perpetually not enough, convinced that if they could just give a little more, the story would finally have a happy ending. For someone with avoidant tendencies, closeness is rarely as simple as affection or comfort. Intimacy, for them, often comes with an invisible weight. Where another person might feel safe being seen, the avoidant feels exposed. Where love might feel like freedom to one, it feels like entrapment to the other. Beneath the surface of their cool exterior is a nervous system trained to equate attachment with danger. Many avoidants grew up in environments where vulnerability was punished, where expressing needs led to disappointment, rejection, or shame. As adults, this history translates into a deep, deep-seated fear. If they let someone in too closely, it will cost them their independence, their control, or even their sense of self. So when a partner leans in with affection, attention, or emotional presence, the avoidant doesn't automatically receive it as love. They experience it as pressure. A text that says, "I miss you," can feel like a demand. A partner asking for deeper conversations may be heard as a threat to their autonomy, a threat to the protective walls they've spent years building. Instead of drawing comfort from closeness, the avoidant interprets it as a sign that they're about to lose themselves. And because the fear of engulfment runs so deep, their instinct is to withdraw, to create space, to regain a sense of safety through distance. This retreat is often confusing for the partner, especially the empath who sees love as closeness. The empath thinks, if I love harder, if I get closer, they'll finally feel safe. But for the avoidant, more closeness does not equal safety, it equals alarm. It's not that they don't feel anything, many avoidants care deeply. But the moment caring requires vulnerability, their body floods with signals to escape. Their defense mechanisms kick in, they minimize, deflect, or disengage. They might become emotionally unavailable or immerse themselves in work, hobbies, or distractions that keep intimacy at bay. The message is consistent. Closeness is overwhelming, distance is relief. What makes this dynamic even more complex is that avoidants often crave love at the same time they push it away. They want connection, but they want it on terms that don't trigger their fears. They may feel loneliness when they withdraw, yet the moment someone comes close enough to soothe that loneliness, the panic of intimacy rises again. It creates an exhausting push-pull cycle, not only for their partner, but for themselves. They wrestle with a quiet internal conflict, needing love but fearing what it requires. For the avoidant, love is not rejected because it is unwanted. It is rejected because it feels dangerous. Their fear is less about the partner and more about what closeness awakens in them: memories of loss, of not being enough, of being controlled, of being abandoned once they reveal too much. By retreating, they believe they are protecting themselves. But in reality, this pattern keeps them locked in isolation, running from the very intimacy they secretly long for. The cycle of pursuit and withdrawal is one of the most painful dynamics in a relationship between a super empath and an avoidant. It begins almost innocently, with the empath sensing a shift in closeness. They notice when the avoidant becomes a little more distant, when replies take longer, when eye contact shortens, or when emotional presence feels reduced. For most people, this would register as a minor change. But for the empath, whose radar for emotional nuance is so finely tuned, it feels enormous. Their instinct is to close the gap, to repair the disconnection before it grows wider. So they lean in, asking questions, initiating conversations, offering reassurances, or showing love more intensely. For the avoidant, this leaning in feels suffocating. Their internal alarms start blaring. Where the empath sees connection, the avoidant feels pressure. Where the empath thinks they're building intimacy, the avoidant feels their freedom slipping away. Their reaction is to withdraw, to take space, to shut down emotionally, to retreat into solitude or distraction. This withdrawal, in turn, amplifies the empath's fear of abandonment. They read the distance as rejection or indifference. They panic, and rather than stepping back, they double down on closeness. The harder they chase, the faster the avoidant runs. The faster the avoidant runs, the harder the empath chases. This cycle can continue for months or even years because both parties believe they are acting in service of their emotional survival. The empath thinks, if I stop trying, I'll lose them. The avoidant thinks, if I stop pulling away, I'll lose myself. Neither is wrong from their perspective, and yet both are trapped. The pursuit provides no safety for the empath because it only creates more withdrawal. The withdrawal provides no relief for the avoidant because it leaves them feeling isolated and disconnected. Both end up exhausted, unfulfilled, and resentful, yet unable to break free from the pull of the cycle. What makes the cycle so powerful is that it plays directly into each person's deepest fears. The empath is terrified of abandonment, so when they sense withdrawal, they can't help but pursue. The avoidant is terrified of engulfment, so when they sense pursuit, they can't help but retreat. The tragedy is that each person's coping mechanism activates the other's wound. The more the empath fears abandonment, the more they pursue, and the more the avoidant feels engulfed. The more the avoidant fears engulfment, the more they withdraw, and the more the empath feels abandoned. It's a loop that feeds on itself, and without awareness, it rarely ends. In many ways, the pursuit-withdrawal cycle feels like a tug-of-war where neither person ever wins. The rope simply gets tighter, leaving burn marks on both hands. The empath grows resentful of always being the one to chase, feeling invisible and unappreciated. The avoidant grows resentful of always being pursued, feeling cornered and misunderstood. What started as attraction and connection becomes a battlefield of unmet needs, with both sides feeling starved for the very love they came searching for. What makes the dynamic between a super empath and an avoidant so intoxicating is the illusion of magnetic chemistry. At the beginning, the connection often feels electric, almost fated. The empath is drawn to the avoidant's mystery, their self-sufficiency, the quiet strength they seem to exude. The avoidant, on the other hand, is captivated by the empath's warmth, their openness, the way they make them feel understood without needing to say much. The chemistry is undeniable, and both people interpret it as proof that they've found something rare. But what feels like soul, deep love is often something more complicated, a reenactment of old wounds, a familiar emotional landscape disguised as destiny. For the empath, the intensity of attraction usually comes from a subconscious recognition. The avoidance distance feels familiar, echoing experiences where love had to be earned or fought for. Their nervous system lights up with the challenge, mistaking struggle for passion. The very resistance of the avoidant makes the empath feel alive, as if winning their love would finally heal something unresolved within themselves. This pursuit becomes intoxicating because the highs and lows of the relationship create chemical surges, dopamine when the avoidant gives a breadcrumb of affection, cortisol when they withdraw, oxytocin when intimacy briefly returns. It's less about love and more about survival, a rollercoaster the empath can't seem to get off. For the avoidant, the empath represents something equally familiar. The empath's eagerness to connect, their willingness to lean in, mirrors the parental figures or past relationships that demanded too much of them emotionally. On a conscious level, they may be drawn to the empath's nurturing qualities, but unconsciously, they are reenacting a pattern where closeness equates to pressure. The warmth that initially felt comforting begins to feel overwhelming. And just as the empath mistakes tension for passion, the avoidant mistakes withdrawal for safety. They believe the intensity of being pursued is proof of their value, yet they simultaneously resent it, which only deepens the cycle. The illusion of chemistry is powerful because it creates a bond that feels fated, almost impossible to walk away from. Both people feel like they've found something that others wouldn't understand, a connection too rare to let go. But in reality, what they've found is not necessarily a soulmate, it's a trauma bond. Trauma bonds feel magnetic because they awaken unfinished business from the past. The nervous system interprets the familiar pain as importance. The empath feels compelled to heal it, and the avoidant feels compelled to protect themselves from it. The push and pull create sparks, but those sparks are not the kind that build a steady flame. They are the kind that burn out, leaving behind ashes and exhaustion. What makes this so difficult to recognize is that the intensity of the connection tricks the mind into believing it must be love. Yet healthy love doesn't thrive on highs and lows, nor does it demand constant chasing and retreating. Healthy love feels steady, reciprocal, and safe. The so-called chemistry between the super empath and the avoidant is rarely that. It is the lure of the familiar wrapped in the language of destiny, keeping both people tethered to a cycle that feels irresistible but is ultimately unsustainable. Awareness is the turning point that allows the super empath to step out of the hidden war with the avoidant. Until the pattern is recognized for what it is, the empath feels compelled to stay, believing that more love, more patience, or more sacrifice will eventually change the dynamic. But the moment the cycle is named, it loses some of its power. The empath begins to see that what feels like love is often just survival mode repeating itself, and that the pursuit of someone who consistently withdraws is not proof of devotion, but a sign of imbalance. With that awareness, the path to freedom begins to open. The first step on that path is setting boundaries. For someone who has spent their life believing their value lies in how much they can give, boundaries can feel selfish at first. But boundaries are not about shutting others out. They are about protecting one's own emotional energy. Instead of chasing, the empath learns to pause and ask, what do I need in this moment? What is healthy for me? By redirecting focus inward, the empath begins to reclaim their sense of self. Boundaries stop the cycle of overgiving and prevent the constant erosion of self-worth that comes from pouring into someone who cannot or will not receive. Alongside boundaries comes the realization that reciprocity is essential. Love cannot thrive in a one-sided exchange. The empath often measures their worth by their capacity to heal and to endure, but true intimacy requires both people to show up. Reciprocity does not mean perfection. It means that both partners are willing to invest, to communicate, and to care in a way that meets each other's needs. When the empath starts to prioritize mutual effort rather than carrying the weight of the relationship alone, they open the door to healthier connections. This shift also redefines what love should feel like. Instead of associating intensity with passion, the empath learns to associate consistency with safety. Instead of craving the highs and lows of the avoidant cycle, they begin to recognize the value of steadiness, reliability, and genuine emotional presence. Love, when it is healthy, is not a battlefield where one person fights to be seen while the other fights to stay hidden. Love is a place where both can breathe, where giving and receiving flow naturally, and where vulnerability does not feel like danger but like trust. The path to freedom is not about demonizing the avoidant or idealizing the empath. It is about breaking the unconscious contract that keeps both locked in a cycle of pain. For the empath, this means no longer confusing endurance with love and no longer sacrificing their needs in hopes of finally being chosen. Freedom is found in recognizing that love is not something to be chased or proven. It is something to be shared, nurtured, and experienced with someone who is equally willing to step into closeness without fear. That awareness turns the hidden war into a lesson and transforms the empath's greatest vulnerability, their capacity to love deeply, into their greatest strength when directed toward relationships that honor it. When you take a step back and see this dynamic for what it really is, you begin to understand something important. Love is not supposed to feel like a constant battle. Love is not proven by how much you can endure, how much you can chase, or how much you can sacrifice just to hold on. True love is proven in its ease, in the reciprocity, in the steady presence, in the safety it brings to your heart. The hidden war between the super empath and the avoidant is not a story of villains and heroes. It is a story of patterns, wounds, and survival strategies colliding. And once you recognize that, you are no longer trapped in the role of the pursuer or the protector. You are free to write a new story, one where your capacity to love deeply is matched by someone else's capacity to love you back openly. So if you take one thing away, let it be this: your sensitivity, your empathy, your depth. That is not a weakness, it is your greatest strength. But it only becomes a strength when you stop pouring it into places where it is not received. The moment you realize you don't have to fight for love, you allow yourself to experience what love was always meant to be: mutual, nurturing, and free. And with that, I just want to thank you. Thank you for giving your time, your attention, and your open heart to a conversation that isn't always easy, but is always necessary. If you've recognized yourself in these words, know this: awareness is already the beginning of change. You are not alone in this, and you are not broken. You are simply learning to direct your love where it can truly grow. Thank you for listening. Thank you for reflecting. And most importantly, thank you for choosing yourself in the process. Until next time, take care of your heart, protect your energy, and remember, you deserve a love that feels like home.